I had never been on the deep web. I thought the whole thing sounded stupid, like who would honestly believe that some illicit part of the internet has unknown atrocities lurking in every corner? But I was working on my master's thesis in sociology, and I thought a paper on internet subculture sounded interesting. I got together with a friend, and he talked to me about TOR, and showed me different precautions I should take to protect my identity and my computer while browsing in the deep web. I was ready to explore this bizarre hive I heard about so much. Needless to say, for about 2 weeks, I sifted through old and odd websites that looked like they were developed during the 90s, obscure internet relics floating around in the middle of nowhere, derelict websites that had been forgotten by time. Most of it was boring junk. A lot of it was crazy Nazi conspiracy theories, drug trafficking, pedophiles. It was exactly as I expected. I would have been content to do my paper on Nazi subcultures on the deep web, or maybe even pedophiles, but I ran across something that interested me. It was a forum awkwardly titled Enthusiasts of Suicide. The name led me to believe that it was a forum that wasn't of English, or at least of an English-speaking origin. The forum itself had a multinational array of boards, users from different countries, different languages, different walks of life. I saw boards in Spanish, French, Turkish, Chinese even, a vast array of boards to say the least. But there was one common theme. Everyone on each of those boards were fanatically obsessed with suicide. People of the English-speaking board shared different ideas about suicide, how to execute it, how to lessen the pain for people who are afraid of suffering, stories about friends who'd committed suicide, suicide fetishes, sharing illicit pictures with one another, people having philosophical discussions about suicide. It didn't seem to stop. Then, on one of the boards, I noticed some people talking about something called the Suicide Show. It's on tonight. Are you gonna watch it? One would say. Nah, I can't. I have a big day tomorrow. I plan on going to work with my 38, killing my boss. Then I'm gonna go kill myself. Another responded. I cringed looking at this. I mean, what the fuck? The Suicide Show? If it was what it sounded like, then it would have been some kind of webcast of a bunch of people committing suicide. I felt my stomach churn. My palms are sweaty as they are now. My mind's racing with the curiosity of what this is. I had to find out what the hell the show is about, and if possible, maybe put a stop to it. This suicide cult had already given me enough material for executing this thesis, but this would be a coup de grace. I found out that show, and it came on in one of my areas. And I fished around until I could find a link to the show. My throat had a huge knot sitting in it. And I know I must have been sweaty, but I couldn't let my nerves get in the way of my research. I was doing something important here. The live feed came on, with an eerie-sounding MIDI playing in the background. The film quality was grainy, as if it was filmed using a cell phone or some sort of cheap camera. A woman with a microphone held tightly in both hands stood with a forced smile on her face. I could see her mascara had ran down as if she'd been crying. She looked like she may be in her 40s. She was Asian, and she looked incredibly uncomfortable and afraid. I gripped the arm of my chair, my nails digging into it. She made me uneasy. The whole thing made me uneasy. But this is getting much more strange. She started speaking in a foreign language, so I quickly clicked a button that would display English subtitles on screen. And here's what it said. Welcome to the Suicide Show. I'll be your host for the evening, she would say in her pitch-shaky, unnerved tone. Just the sound of that frightened voice, the sound of this odd thing that was now being forced into my ear just made this all the more surreal. And to be frank, slightly nauseating. "Let's start the show," she shouted in an uneasily forced glee. She threw up an arm, her teeth clenched tightly into a nervous smile, a tear rolling down from one eye. This had to be fake. It's just so weird. There's no way. I was honestly about to be privy to what I thought I was going to be witnessing. They tried to convince me that it was some sort of illicit game show from hell, that this woman was going to be held against her will like a Vanna White at gunpoint. But I wasn't biting. There's no way that this was really happening. "Our first contestant is from New York. His name is Robert Howard." She read the card nervously, looking up at the camera with wild eyes. She then lowered her card. I can see her hand shaking, and compulsory toothy smile flashed again. She lifted a hand in the air, and a spotlight highlighted the area where a man was sitting in a chair. He had a shotgun in both hands. I felt my nails dig deeper into the armrest. I clenched my teeth, and I watched in horror. He lifted the shotgun to his mouth. I saw tears running from his eye, and then could see the inside of his mouth light up for a brief second. A shot rang out, stirringly loud. I jerked in my chair from the sound of that blast. I saw his head jerk back briefly, almost like the Bud Dwyer incident. The discharge of his brain and blood hit the wall behind him. His head lurched forward, and his upper body slumped ahead, folding on itself, his head dangling between his legs. I could see the top of his head. I could see blood and gore just falling out of it, like it was some sort of pus out of a zit. And I could see smoke waiting from where the blast had penetrated. I don't know really how to describe this. I'd seen plenty of horror movies, of course, I had seen plenty of gore on the internet. I knew the difference. I placed a hand on my mouth, and I could feel the air vacate my lungs, and I just stared in abject horror. "Judges?" the woman yelled out, throwing her arm as a cheap camera swung to highlight three people standing on a table. They wore black masks with zippers that formed into smiles on their mouths, and tapes were formed X's over their eyes with small punctures in them so they could see the show. One judge held up a 3.8, another held up a 4.0, and the final judge held up a 3.5. "Our next contestant is Carlos Rivera from Los Angeles," she said, moving on to the next man. The man stood still, wearing a shirt and a simple pair of jeans. He was holding something in his right hand. His head was hanging low. He looked like he was focusing or concentrating on something, trying to steel himself. He gritted his teeth, clutching them tightly. His body is shaking, and he suddenly started to yell furiously as he brought the butcher knife up to his neck and started slicing across his throat. The knife cut coarsely through the skin, ripping through flesh, but he didn't get across his entire throat before he began to fall to his knees and grabbed his gullet with both hands. I saw blood splurting all over the floor, gushing forward, open from the wound. His eyes were lit up with fear. He choked on his own blood. "Look at him gush! The woman would cry out. Her voice was a mixture of false enthusiasm and panic, and I don't even know how to describe this. He collapsed onto the floor, his legs kicking as he struggled to breathe. "Judges?" the woman said again. The camera swung around once more. One held up a 4.8, 4.9, and 4.7 respectively. There were two other contestants, but I just couldn't watch anymore. I closed the window to the feed, and I walked over to my own window to catch my breath. My heart was racing. What the hell did I just see? I didn't sleep that night. could see I could see that man who slit his own throat. I could see his eyes as they struggled to breathe. I could see his mouth full of blood. I could see his bloody hands clasping at his neck with a mixture of instinctual reaction or regretful horror. I could see him kicking on the floor, laying sideways on a pool of his own blood. Every time I closed my eyes. That's what I saw. That's all I saw. Needless to say, I dropped the paper onto Suicide Enthusiast. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, That Creepy Reading, and today we're here to talk about The Suicide Show. The Suicide Show was requested to be narrated by a good friend of mine, Blame It on George. And to be frank, it's an amazing story. I am absolutely fascinated with the creativity of this. Honestly, I haven't read many stories from the deep web, but I have. And I have read this, and from what I'm reading, this seems to be a rather interesting story. A story that could possibly be real. I mean, all you would need is a website with a capable streaming program and a cell phone, and this technically could be done. Although, it does disturb me to think about how this, again, could be done. And that's why the story works. Even though it's short, even though there's a lot of graphic material in it, the story is believable. And it really, honestly, makes your suspension of disbelief quite valid. Because, I don't know, I've never been on the deep web, but from what I hear, a lot of sick and fucked up shit actually does happen on the deep web, as it's the 95% of websites that Google doesn't show you. Maybe this is real, maybe this is not. I actually have no clue. But all I know is that The Suicide Show is a fantastic story. And for those who read it, and for the writer himself, I'd like to congratulate, because this is some great media right here. Thanks for listening to my read of The Suicide Show. You can find a link to it in the description. And if you guys are not afraid to go on the deep web, maybe you could find it for yourself. This has been your host, That Creepy Reading, and I'm signing off.